There's a particular kind of shame that doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't arrive with sirens or accusations. It slips in quietly, the way cold air finds the gap under a door, and by the time you feel it, it's already inside you, settled deep in your chest like something that belongs there. I've been a rancher for 31 years. I've watched calves born in blizzards, buried horses I raised from foals, negotiated with banks that wanted to take everything my grandfather built. I thought I understood hardship. I thought I could recognize it when I saw it, the hollow eyes, the slumped shoulders, the defeated posture of someone the world had chewed up and spat out. I was wrong about almost everything the day I met Rosa. She was sitting on a wooden crate outside the feed store in Magdalena, New Mexico, barefoot, her dark hair tangled and wind-knotted, wearing a dress that had seen too many seasons. The skin on her arms was sun-darkened and road-rough. Her left eye had a small scar running through the brow, thin as a thread. She wasn't looking at anyone. She was watching a hawk circle above the water tower like it was the only thing in the world worth watching. I walked toward her with $2 bills folded in my hand, the quiet, practiced gesture of a man who thinks he understands what's needed. She looked at my hand, then she looked at me. And then she laughed. Not meanly, not bitterly. It was a laugh that came from some deep, private knowledge I didn't have, full and unguarded, like water breaking through stone. The kind of laugh that makes you feel, suddenly and completely, that you are the one who has been misread. I stood there holding those $2 like a fool. And that was the beginning of the longest, most humbling, most clarifying 3 days of my life. Not a diary, I want to be clear about that distinction, because my eldest son Marcus thinks it's the same thing and has been giving me grief about it since he was 14. A diary is feelings. A field log is observations. The fact that those two categories have spent the last decade blurring into each other is not something I'm prepared to discuss publicly. The log started as a ranching habit, weather patterns, pasture conditions, calf counts, water table levels, practical things. But somewhere around my 53rd year, it became something else. A record of things I noticed that I couldn't explain. Small moments that snagged on something inside me and wouldn't let go. I'd write them down because writing them made them real, and making them real felt somehow like it mattered. I wrote about Rosa every night for 3 days. This is the first time I've said any of it out loud. I'd driven down to Magdalena from my place near Dattel, 60 miles of high desert road that smells like juniper and old heat. The kind of drive that clears your head whether you want it cleared or not. My truck needed a wheel bearing looked at, and I needed to settle a long-standing account at Trevino's Feed and Grain before Archero's son called me again. I had a list in my pocket, the way I always do. Bearings, feed account, diesel, maybe a green chili cheeseburger from the place on the corner that's been there since before I was born. I parked on Main Street at 8:30 in the morning. The town was quiet the way small New Mexico towns are quiet, not empty, just unhurried, as if time here had agreed to slow down out of respect for the heat. A few trucks idled at the gas station. A couple of old men sat in folding chairs outside the barber shop, not talking, just occupying the same space the way old friends do. And then in front of Trevino's, I saw her. She was on a wooden pallet crate that someone had left leaning against the wall, sitting cross-legged, barefoot. The dress she wore was a faded green-blue, thin cotton, the kind of garment that had probably been washed so many times it had no strong opinions left about its own color. Her hair was down and tangled, the kind of tangled that comes from sleeping outside, and there was a canvas bag on the ground beside her that had seen serious miles. What I noticed first, before any of it, was that she wasn't panhandling. She wasn't holding a sign, wasn't watching people pass, wasn't performing the invisible theater of need that I'd grown quietly, guiltily accustomed to reading in cities. She was watching the hawk. There's a water tower at the north end of Main Street, an old rusted thing with the town name barely readable anymore. Above it, a red-tailed hawk was working the thermals in slow, patient circles. The girl's head tracked it with a focus that was almost meditative, chin slightly lifted, eyes steady, the rest of her completely still. I almost walked past. I almost went straight into Trevino's, settled my account, did my errands, drove home, and never wrote a word about any of it. I've thought about that version of the morning many times since. Instead, I stopped. I don't know entirely why. Part of it was the barefoot thing, the road dust visible on her feet, the cracked skin at the heels. Part of it was the canvas bag, which had what looked like a hand-drawn map of some kind stuffed partway into the outer pocket. Part of it was something harder to name, a quality of stillness about her that was different from exhaustion. Exhaustion, I know, I've worn it for whole seasons. This was something else. This was presence. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out 2 $1 bills, the folded kind I keep there out of a habit my mother instilled when I was young. Always have something to give, she'd say. Even if it's small, have it. I'd lived by that. It felt like decency. It felt like doing the right thing by someone in need. I walked up to her with the bills extended, not quite making eye contact, which is its own thing, that deliberate avoidance, the way we signal we're being charitable without asking anything back. Here, I said, or something like that. Some variation of the economy of words you use when you want to be kind without making a production of it. She turned from the hawk and looked at my hand. Then she looked at my face. And she laughed. It wasn't what I expected. I'd braced for gratitude, or for refusal, or for the complex silence of someone who doesn't want to acknowledge the transaction at all. I was not prepared for laughter, full, unguarded, genuine laughter, directed not at me cruelly but through me, like I was a window she was seeing clearly for the first time. "I don't need money," she said. Her English was clean and measured, with a rhythm underneath it that wasn't entirely from New Mexico, something older in the cadence. She said it without condescension, but without apology either. I stood there, $2 bills, my hand not moving. "I'm sorry," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. "You don't need to apologize either," she said, and looked back up at the hawk. I should have left. I put the bills back in my pocket and did not leave. "Waiting for someone?" I asked. She considered this. "Not exactly." "You from around here?" Another pause. She tilted her head slightly. The hawk shifted direction, riding an invisible river of air toward the mesa south of town. "From around here in the way hawks are from around here," she said. "Passing through on something bigger." I've heard plenty of people say cryptic things because they want to seem interesting. This wasn't that. She said it matter-of-factly, the way you'd say I turned left at the junction, just information. "Calvin Briggs," I said, and held out my hand, the same hand that had just tried to reduce her to a $2 problem. She looked at the hand for a beat, then she shook it. Her grip was firm and dry, and her palm had calluses in places that told you something about the kind of work she did with her hands. "Rosa," she said, just Rosa, no surname offered. "You eaten today, Rosa?" She glanced at me sideways, not suspiciously, more like she was recalibrating something. "Why?" "Because I'm going to get a green chili cheeseburger from the corner place, and I'd like to buy you one too." "That's not charity," I added quickly. "That's just breakfast." She looked at me for a long moment. Whatever she was measuring, she came to some private conclusion about it. "All right," she said, and unfolded herself from the crate with a fluid ease that made me realize she was probably half my age, late 20s, maybe 30, and in considerably better physical condition than I was. She picked up the canvas bag, slung it over one shoulder, and walked with me to the corner. The burger place is called Lupe's, and it has exactly 4 tables and a hand-lettered menu board and the best green chili in Socorro County, which is a claim I'll defend in any company. We sat at the corner table by the window. Rosa ordered coffee, black, and the number 3. She set her canvas bag on the floor between her feet and kept her right hand resting near the top of it, not clutching, just present, the way you keep a hand near something that matters. I ordered the same thing and opened my field log on the table, which is a habit I can't suppress even in social situations. Marcus says it makes people feel like they're being observed. He's not wrong. Rosa noticed it immediately. "What's that?" "Field log, I'm a rancher." "What do you log in it?" "Things I see, weather, conditions, things that don't fit neatly into anything else." She nodded like this made perfect sense. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug and looked out the window. On the street, a dog trotted past with the purposeful air of someone who had places to be. A man in a truck pulled a U-turn too wide and the back wheel bumped the curb. The town continued at its own pace. "Can I ask where you're headed?" I said. "White Sands eventually, then north." "What's north?" She considered how much to say. "Research." Another pause. "I'm documenting oral histories, traditional plant knowledge from communities along the corridor between here and Taos. I was doing my doctorate, anthropology. The past tense landed with a small thud she didn't try to cushion. I looked at her. Barefoot, sun-rough, tangled hair, a canvas bag with a hand-drawn map. She caught my expression. The laugh, she said, was because you looked at me and saw exactly what you expected to see. Most people do. I wanted to say I didn't. I didn't say that because it would have been a lie and she would have known it. The laugh wasn't mean, I said. No, she agreed. I've been laughed at meanly, that wasn't it. Our food came. She ate without hurry and without performance, the way someone eats when they've learned that meals are not guaranteed and must be respected when they come. She didn't wolf it. She chewed slowly, looked at the window, returned. There was a rhythm to it that felt like ritual. What happened, I said, with the doctorate? She took a sip of coffee. Outside, the hawk had moved. It was circling south of us now, above the tire shop, and she tracked it for a moment before answering. Money, my advisor, a paper I refused to write the way they wanted it written. She said this without bitterness, which impressed me more than if she'd said it with fury. I walked away, or they pushed me out, somewhere between those two things. Went 14 months ago. I did the math on what 14 months without institutional support would have meant. On the road. Research continuing, apparently, without the scaffolding of the institution that had originally funded it. The barefoot walking, the canvas bag, the hand-drawn map. You're still doing the research, I said. Without the doctorate. The research was never about the degree, she said simply. I looked down at my field log. I'd written without thinking about it. She laughed at $2 because she knew something I didn't, still learning what. We walked back to Trevino's after breakfast. I settled my account with Archero's son, a quiet transaction involving some mutual embarrassment about a debt that had stretched over 6 months due to conditions neither of us had controlled. When I came out, Rosa was back on the crate, back watching the sky. Except the hawk was gone. She was still watching the place where it had been, as if watching was itself something worth doing regardless of whether the object of observation remained. I had my list, bearings, diesel, drive home. 60 miles of juniper and heat. I stood on the sidewalk. My truck's going to the garage, I said. Won't be ready until tomorrow. You have somewhere to sleep tonight. She looked at me with that recalibrating expression again. I'll be fine. That's not what I asked. A beat, she almost said something, then held it back. Then, the church on 2nd Street lets people sleep in the hall on Thursdays. Today's Friday, I said. She didn't answer that. I've lived alone since my wife Carol passed 4 years ago. The ranch house has 2 spare bedrooms that hold nothing but Carol's Christmas decorations and Marcus's abandoned furniture from when he moved to Albuquerque. I told myself I was going to offer the spare room because it was the practical thing. Because it was Magdalena in August, which at night still holds the heat in pavement and dips cool in the desert grass, and is no place to sleep without cover. There's a motel 2 blocks over, I said. The Sunset, clean rooms, $12 a night, I'll cover it. And that's not charity, I said again, that's. Breakfast logic, she said. Breakfast logic, I agreed. She looked at me for a long time. The street moved around us. A woman walked past pushing a stroller, 2 teenagers on bikes, the smell of someone's breakfast still cooking somewhere. Okay, Rosa said, but tomorrow I walk. Where to? South of town. There's an elder I need to speak with, Marta Berla. She's 91 and the last living person who remembers the ceremonies at the old spring site before it was fenced off in the 60s. Marta Berla, I repeated. I knew the name. The Berlas had ranched land adjacent to mine for 3 generations. Marta was Archero Trevino's grandmother-in-law, which made the web of this town smaller than I'd remembered. You know her? Rosa asked. By name, I said. Her family and mine share a fence line. Rosa looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read, something between assessment and something quieter. Huh, she said. That was all, but it meant something. I logged it that night in the motel parking lot, sitting in my truck while Rosa checked in. She knows more about what she's doing than I assumed when I walked up with $2. The assumption was mine, so was the correction. The hawk came back. I saw it through the windshield, working the Mesa thermals in the last light. She was right that it was from around here the way hawks are from around here. passing through on something bigger. I'm going to take her to see Marta Berla tomorrow. I didn't offer this yet. I'm not sure why I haven't. I think it's because I know she won't laugh this time. I think I'm not ready to not have her laugh at me. I held the pen above the page for a while after that. Then I wrote, beginning to think I'm the one who needed something today. Not sure what yet, maybe just to see clearly for a few hours. I closed the log and sat in the heat-softened dark, listening to the town settle around me, and thought about what it meant to be 58 years old and still getting things wrong in the most instructive ways. The bearing on the truck was worse than the mechanic thought. It would take 2 days, not one. I called Marcus that evening from the parking lot of the Sunset Motel. He answered on the third ring, slightly distracted the way he always is when he's at his desk. I could hear the clicking of his keyboard under his voice. Everything all right? Truck's in the shop, going to be a couple days. You need me to come get you? No, I'm fine here. A pause, Dad. Are you actually fine, or are you doing the thing where you say you're fine, and then you're not fine? I'm fine, Marcus. He let it go the way adult children learn to let things go. We talked about the ranch, the calf count, the water situation, which was bad and getting worse, and about his girlfriend's sister's wedding that was coming up in September, which he'd been ambivalent about attending. And then, just before I hung up, he asked, You logging? Always. Anything good? I looked across the parking lot toward the motel rooms. One window had a warm light behind it. Roses, I thought. Yeah, I said, something good. He laughed, not the way Rosa had laughed, but warmly, in the way of someone who loves you in spite of everything. Get some sleep, Dad. I did, eventually. After I wrote 4 more pages in the field log, which is 4 more than I usually write, and which contained more questions than observations. The questions had names like, what do I actually know about this place where I've lived my whole life? What gets recorded, and what gets fenced off in the name of someone else's ownership? If I think I'm being kind and I'm actually being presumptuous, what's the difference between the two from the outside? I didn't answer them. You don't answer questions like that in the parking lot of the Sunset Motel in Magdalena on a Friday night. You just write them down so they're in front of you, so they're real. The hawk, presumably, went wherever hawks go at night. The spring site that Marta Berla remembered was probably, right now, behind a fence with my neighbor's name on the post. Rosa in the room with the warm light was probably writing too. Her own kind of log. Her own kind of record of a day that must have included, among other things, a rancher walking up to her with $2 in his hand and the complete, comfortable certainty that he understood what she needed. She laughed, and she was right to laugh, and I was slowly beginning to understand why. I dream about water when there isn't any. This is not a poetic observation, it's a clinical one. In drought years, which this was, the mind starts doing something strange where it compensates at night for what's missing in the day. I've woken from dreams of full creek beds, of the stock tank overflowing, of rain so steady and thick you can smell the petrichor in the dream itself. I wake up and feel the specific cruelty of a dry morning and go do the work anyway, because the work is the work. I woke at 5:30 the second morning in the Sunset Motel, and I had dreamed about a spring. Not mine, something older, stone-edged with cottonwood trees older than any structure nearby, and water so clear you could see individual grains of sand in the bed. In the dream, I was watching it from a distance, from the wrong side of a fence, which is exactly the kind of dream logic that you remember afterward and understand immediately without having to interpret. I wrote it down. Rosa knocked on my door at 6:15. She'd braided her hair. She was still barefoot, but she'd washed her feet and the canvas bag had a fresh configuration to it, things repacked, the map visible but folded differently. She had a small notebook tucked into her breast pocket that I hadn't noticed yesterday. Ready, she said. Coffee first. Already have some? She held up 2 cups from somewhere, probably the diner on the main street that opened at 6. This is a thank you, not a trade. I accepted it. It was strong and slightly over-extracted. The way coffee from a diner is when the pot's been going since 5, and it was exactly what I needed. We drove south in my borrowed truck, a courtesy vehicle from the mechanic, a 2003 Chevy with a cracked dashboard and air conditioning that functioned only when it chose to. The desert came up around us fast once we cleared the edge of town, the scrub flattening out into a wide, tawny stillness. Ahead, the San Mateo Mountains hung in the morning blue like something remembered rather than seen. Rosa had the map out on her knee. It wasn't drawn on standard paper. It was on the back of what looked like a photocopied page from an older document, and she'd layered her own lines over the pre-existing print. Geographic annotations in small, precise handwriting. Markers I couldn't interpret, but that clearly had a system. "You mapped this yourself," I said. "Over 3 trips." She traced a line with her finger that curved south, and then doubled back toward a feature I didn't immediately recognize. The spring would have been here, based on the oral descriptions and the 1937 hydrological survey. But the fencing went in around 1961, which moved access. Marta walked me to it in her mind last year, the last time I spoke with her. "You've spoken with her before?" "Twice. She's extraordinary." Rosa said this quietly, with a reverence that wasn't performative. "She remembers the taste of the water. She described the mineral content, the particular quality of the cold, the way the cottonwood leaves moved differently there than anywhere else. She was 12 when she last went. She's 91 now. 79 years since she'd been to the spring, and she remembered the taste." I drove without speaking for a while, which is how I process things, movement and quiet in combination. The cracked dashboard vibrated faintly at highway speed. Rosa held the map steady on her knee. "Who owns the land now?" I asked, though some part of me already knew. "A ranch trust out of Santa Fe. They bought the parcel in 1989. A pause. "Before that it was your neighbors, the Berlas. It was sold to settle an estate issue after a death." I kept my eyes on the road, and the spring itself. Fenced off, signed, no trespassing. The cattle used the downstream outlet until about 5 years ago when that dried up. The spring itself may still have flow. The elevation protects it. She paused. "I'm hoping it does." I made a turn onto a dirt road I knew from decades of neighboring, a 2-rut track running south along a fence line. The fence had new wire on old posts. Someone maintained it. A yellow sign every 100 yards or so, the standard language of exclusion. "We'd be trespassing," I said. "Not an accusation, just the fact of it." "I know." "Marta's land originally," I said. "Yes." The silence between us had a weight to it. I've trespassed on neighboring land exactly once in my life, a steer that broke through in a storm, and I went in after it, and I called first to say I was going, and I fixed the gap on the way back. That's the protocol in a place like this, where land isn't abstract. Land is the thing itself. It's what your grandfather's hands made into something survivable, and someone else's grandfather's hands too, and those claims don't always agree on a map. "If I'm with you," I said slowly, "and we're going to visit a hydrological site for research documentation of traditional ecological knowledge." I was choosing words the way you choose footing on uncertain ground. "That's not the same as breaking in to fish." "No," Rosa said, "it's not." "And you have academic documentation of the project." "In the bag." She patted the canvas bag at her feet. I pulled the truck over to the fence line and shut off the engine. We sat there in the cab with the dust settling around us. 100 yards ahead, through the scrub, something green was visible. The faint but unmistakable green of cottonwood trees, which in a desert means only one thing. "Water." "Let's go," I said. The fence was 4 strands of barbed wire on wooden posts. I've gone through 1,000 of them in my life, the practiced rancher motion, one hand on the top strand pulling it up, one foot on the second strand pushing it down, lean through without catching. Rosa watched me do it, then went through with a fluid, experienced movement that told me she'd crossed a lot of fences in 14 months. The scrub between the fence and the trees was head-high chamisa in the late summer gold of its blooming, and it smelled, powerfully, headily, of something between turpentine and sage. Rosa slowed in it. She reached out and rubbed a stem between her fingers and brought them to her face. "Ericameria nauseosa," she said. "Rabbit brush, this specific subspecies, see the fine gray-white stems, this was used here for basketry dye. Yellow, Marta's mother showed her." She pulled out the small notebook and wrote something. I watched her handwriting from an angle, quick, definite, with the occasional symbol that wasn't a letter. We pushed through the chamisa toward the cottonwoods. The sound changed before anything else, the faint, impossible sound of water. Not much. A trickle. But in the daddle country in August, a trickle is the sound of survival, and your body recognizes it somewhere below language. The spring was smaller than my dream. Stone-edged, as I'd imagined, sandstone rimrock that had cracked and settled over centuries into a rough natural basin. Maybe 4 feet across, 2 feet of dark still water at its center. Around it, the mud was soft and animal-tracked, deer, I thought, and maybe elk higher up the hill that the basin drained. Cottonwoods old as anything, their roots vanishing into the earth around the stone like something trying to hold the whole arrangement together. Rosa stopped at the edge of it. She stood completely still for a long moment. The water caught the morning light. An insect moved on the surface tension, one of the skimmer bugs that lives on water's skin, indifferent to the depth beneath it. Then she crouched down and put her left hand flat against the stone rim, just rested it there. Her eyes were closed. I moved back a step, because some moments aren't for witnesses. She stayed like that for maybe 30 seconds. Then she opened her eyes and looked at the water. She wasn't crying, but something in her face had shifted or settled maybe, the way a tense muscle releases when you finally let the weight down. She pulled out the notebook. She began documenting water clarity, apparent flow rate, the plant species at the margin, the stone composition, the cottonwood girth that suggested age. She photographed with a small camera she produced from the canvas bag. She measured the basin's circumference with a length of string she kept in the bag for exactly this purpose. She moved efficiently and with total focus, the way a person moves when they know their time somewhere is limited. I sat on a flat rock 10 feet away and wrote in my field log and tried to stay out of the way. What I wrote was, she treats this spring the way I treat the graves of people I love. Like the act of being here is itself the thing that matters. Like showing up is a form of keeping the record from disappearing. Then I sat and listened to the water. After maybe 40 minutes, Rosa came and sat near me, not beside me but near. She set the notebook on her knee. Marta described the taste, she said. She said it tasted like iron and cold and something she didn't have a word for, like what rain smells like but in water. Petrichor, I said. She looked at me. That's the word for what rain smells like. Yes, she looked at the spring. She'll want to know the word. I thought about a 91-year-old woman who had last tasted this water at 12, who carried the taste for 79 years in a place where language had gaps for it, who had told a barefoot doctoral student about it twice in careful, particular detail. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Yes." "When you walked away from the doctorate, the paper they wanted you to write differently." She waited. "What was the paper about?" A pause. The cottonwood leaves moved above us in a breeze too faint to feel at ground level. "Traditional ecological knowledge and legal land rights," she said. "The argument they wanted was careful, measured, qualified at every turn." It looked at the question from outside, from the academic position that observes without claiming. Another pause. "My argument was different." "What was your argument?" She looked at the spring. That the people who knew the taste of this water had more right to determine its future than the people who owned the fence. The barbed wire was visible from where we sat, just barely, through the chamisa. A yellow no trespassing sign on a post, 40 yards away. "They thought it was advocacy," she said, "not scholarship." "Is it?" "Yes," she said simply. "Both. I think both at once. I don't think those are different things when you're talking about who gets to decide what disappears." I sat with that. There are people who say things that are designed to make you feel the argument, not just understand it. Rosa wasn't doing that. She wasn't performing the argument. She was just stating it clearly, the way you state the bearing on a truck when asked. This is what it is. This is what needs fixing. "What happens to what you've documented?" I asked. "I give it to the communities directly. Marta has copies of everything I've recorded, her words, the plant knowledge, the location of sites. I have a contact in Taos who works with cultural preservation, and I've submitted 2 papers. She said this last part with a kind of quiet defiance. "Under my own name, to journals that accepted them. Without the institution. Without the institution." I looked at my field log. I'd started a new page without realizing it, and the doctorate. She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know, maybe never, maybe later, maybe a different one somewhere else." She ran her thumb along the edge of the notebook. "The research is happening. The knowledge is being recorded. The degree is a piece of paper that would help me get other pieces of paper. But I said, but I think about it, she said. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. I think about the funding, the access, the legitimacy that it grants. I think about what it costs to walk away. She said this last thing plainly, without self-pity, but with an honesty that landed harder because of the absence of self-pity. It had cost something real. She'd chosen the cost with her eyes open, and she still felt it. I recognized that feeling. It was the feeling of a decision you made correctly, and that continues to hurt anyway, because correct decisions and painless decisions are often entirely different things. I've had a few of those. We drove to Marta Berla's house in the mid-morning. It was a small adobe north of the old highway, well kept, with a kitchen garden along the south wall and a dog of indeterminate age sleeping in the shade of a vehicle that hadn't moved in years. The dog lifted its head, decided we were acceptable, and went back to sleep. A woman in her 40s came to the door, Marta's granddaughter, as it turned out. She recognized me. Yolanda Trevino, Archero's wife's sister, a woman I'd nodded at 100 times at the feed store without knowing her name properly. She looked surprised to see me with Rosa, and then, immediately after that, not surprised at all. "Rosa's back," she said, and opened the door wider. The inside of the house smelled of dried herbs and something sweet cooking and old wood. We were led to a back room that had been set up for Marta's comfort, the afternoon light coming in warm and steady through a window with a cloth shade, and in a reclining chair that had clearly been the center of her world for some years, Marta Berla. She was small. Her hair was white and thin and pulled back neatly, and her hands rested on the arms of the chair with the quality of permanence that comes with age. They looked like they'd been there for years, like roots. Her eyes were dark and very clear, and they found Rosa immediately. "You came back," she said. Her voice was strong, stronger than I expected. "I went to the spring," Rosa said. A pause. Marta's hands didn't move, but her expression did. Something moved across it that I couldn't precisely name. Not surprise. Not even joy exactly. Something older. Recognition. The way you look when a thing you've held for a long time is finally placed somewhere outside of yourself. "The water," Marta said. "Is it still there?" "Yes," Rosa said. "Still there." Marta closed her eyes. She breathed out. I sat in the corner, small, and wrote. She breathed like someone who'd been holding something for decades and just put it down. I don't know what that costs. I'm beginning to think I should find out. And then I wrote, "The spring is still there." I'm glad I drove 60 miles for a wheel bearing. I'm glad my truck needed fixing. I'm glad she laughed at me. I looked up at Rosa, who was sitting forward in her chair across from Marta, her notebook open, the small camera on the table between them, and I watched her explain, in a precise, respectful, unhurried way, everything she'd measured and seen and documented. Marta listened. After a while, she spoke. And what she said I could only partially follow because some of it was in Spanish and some of it was in something older, and Rosa's notebook moved quickly. But at one point Marta stopped and looked at me, directly, unexpectedly, across the room. "And who is this?" she asked Rosa. Rosa looked at me too, a small hesitation. "A neighbor of yours," she said. "He knew your family's land." Marta studied me with those clear dark eyes. "Which side?" "North fence line," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I didn't fully catch in the older language that made Rosa's pen stop on the page for half a second. "What did she say?" I asked Rosa later outside. Rosa was quiet for a moment. She said, "The Northfield neighbor, good, he should know what was there." I stood in the yard with that. Should know, not shouldn't know, should. The dog had moved from its spot in the shade and was now sitting near my feet, looking up at me with the amiable vagueness of old animals. "She meant the spring," I said. "She meant everything," Rosa said. "The spring, the plant sites, the old boundary. What was there before the fence?" I thought about 31 years of ranching land that shared a border with Berla land. I thought about how much I didn't know. I thought about water tables and deed documents and what it means to own a fence line versus what it means to know a place. "I need to make some phone calls," I said. Rosa looked at me carefully. "The ranch trust that owns the parcel, they may take a meeting. I know the board chair, he's from Socorro. We've crossed paths at county meetings." I wasn't sure where I was going with this. I was finding it out loud. I don't know if it goes anywhere, but documenting that the spring has flow and that there's traditional use history that predates the trust. It's complicated, Rosa said. Everything worth doing is complicated. She looked at me for a long moment, not with the laugh from yesterday, with something different, more careful, more guarded, the way you look at something you want to believe but have been burned by too many times. Why, she said. And I understood the question. Not why call, but why you, specifically. Why this rancher with $2 and 31 years of neighboring someone else's dispossession without ever stopping to look at it clearly? I didn't have a complete answer. I had the beginning of one. Because Marta said I should know, I said, and because I think she's right. Rosa was quiet. The dog leaned against my shin. I'll make a copy of what I've documented, she said finally, for your records, in case it becomes relevant. Thank you, I said. She looked at me with an expression I was starting to recognize, the one where she was measuring not what I was saying, but whether I was going to follow through. Whether this was the thing that passed for decency or the thing that was actually decent. I didn't blame her for the question. It was a fair one. I wrote that in the log too, on the drive back, when we stopped at the top of a rise, and I let the engine cool, and the desert afternoon opened up around us in its vast, indifferent heat. Fair question. I'm going to try to answer it correctly. The truck was ready by 9. The mechanic, a compact, precise man named Felix who'd been working cars in Magdalena since before I was born, handed me the keys with a succinct summary of all that had been done, and all that should be done next, which is the mechanic equivalent of a prognosis. He'd replaced the wheel bearing and identified 2 other things that were heading toward failure, which I wrote in the field log under maintenance, because even a field log needs practical things to keep it honest. Rosa was not at the motel when I pulled back to settle her room charge. She'd left an envelope at the front desk with her room key and a note that said, in careful handwriting, "Morning walk, south route. I'll find you at Trevino's around noon if that works." I stood in the motel parking lot with the envelope in my hand. The sun was already fierce at 9:30. The Magdalena Mountains to the east were lit up white and stark. A crow on the power line watched me with the irritable skepticism of crows everywhere. I drove to Trevino's. I settled my wheel-bearing bill. Felix and Archero were cousins, which I'd known, and which had resulted in a slight and unspoken discount that I didn't mention and he didn't explain. I drank coffee at the counter with Archero, who asked after Marcus and the ranch water situation, and to whom I talked for 20 minutes about the county's deteriorating management of watershed rights, which is a conversation Archero will have with anyone who opens the door, because it is one of the things that keeps him up at night. I didn't mention the spring. Not yet. The phone call I had in mind wasn't a thing you discussed before making it, because discussing it turned it into a promise, and I wasn't ready to promise until I knew whether the ground was solid. But I thought about it the whole time I was talking to Archero. I thought about the spring with its clear water and its stone rim and its old cottonwood roots. I thought about Marta Berla's expression when Rosa told her the water was still there. I thought about 79 years. At 11:50, Rosa came through the door of Trevino's. She was dusty from the walk. Her dress had a long stripe of red earth along the hem, and she'd tied her hair back with something practical, a strip of cloth. She was carrying a small bundle of something tied in a chamisa stem, which she set on the counter carefully before sitting down. Her feet were in sandals now, actual sandals, battered and repaired, but sandals. A concession to the terrain or perhaps to the distance she'd covered. Archero looked at her, then at the bundle. He recognized her before I introduced her or recognized the bundle more precisely. He glanced at me with an expression that I read as, "You've been interesting without telling me." "Rosa did her research south of town this morning," I said. "The canyon route," Archero said. "Along the ridgeline," Rosa said. She had a tiredness in her that was the good kind, the kind that comes from hours of focused movement, not from defeat. "I was documenting a plant community near the second arroyo, Arctostaphylos pungens manzanita. There's a stand of it that's significant, older than it looks. The root structure would have been in use here for." "My grandmother used manzanita," Archero said, quietly, not interrupting, just placing himself in the conversation. Rosa looked at him with her full attention, the kind of attention that costs something and gives something back in equal measure. "Tell me about that," she said. I moved to the other end of the counter and opened my field log and let them talk. They talked for nearly an hour. I've known Arturo Trevino for 20 years. I know him as a businessman, as a neighbor, as someone who cares about the county and is irritated by the county in roughly equal proportions. I know him as a man who keeps a good account of what he's owed and a good account of what he owes, and who doesn't often blur those categories. I did not know what happened to him when someone asked him, in the right way, about his grandmother. He told Rosa about the manzanita, and then about other plants, and then about a clay site near the old road that his grandmother had known, and then about a particular dish he'd seen her make once that he couldn't replicate and couldn't find in any cookbook, and then about a song she sang in a language he'd never learned because there was no one to teach him, and he was 14 when she died, and he'd been keeping all of this in the place where grief parks things that don't have anywhere better to go. Rosa wrote in her notebook. She asked questions that were not leading. She made no sound of sympathy that would redirect the story toward her. She just sat in it, across from him, the way you sit across from a river and watch what it carries. At one point, Arturo stopped talking and looked at the counter for a moment. He cleared his throat. Then he said, "Nobody's asked me those things." Rosa didn't say, "I'm sorry" or "That's such a shame." She said, "Thank you for telling me." He nodded. He looked a little surprised by himself, the way people do when they discover they've said something true that they didn't know they'd been holding. I wrote in the log, documentation isn't just the spring, it's this, the thing that happens when someone asks correctly. And then she knew how to ask, she learned it. That's its own kind of scholarship, and nobody gave her a degree for it. We had lunch, the three of us, Arturo included, which surprised him too, and somewhere in the middle of it Rosa mentioned, carefully, the spring. She didn't mention the trespassing, she mentioned the documentation, she mentioned Marta, she mentioned the hydrological survey from 1937, she mentioned the plant communities around the water source and their cultural significance. Arturo listened, his face did several things. "That's on the trust land," he said. "Yes." A long pause. "My wife's family land." "Yes." Another pause. He picked up his coffee cup and set it down without drinking. "I know the board chair, James Whitaker, from county meetings." I looked at my coffee. "As do I." The three of us sat with that for a moment. "He's a reasonable man," Arturo said finally. This was not quite an endorsement, but it was the beginning of a sentence that might eventually become one. "The documentation Rosa has," I said, "would support a conservation easement argument. There's precedent in the state for traditional use protection at sites like this. It wouldn't transfer ownership, but it could affect permitted access." Rosa was watching both of us. She had the careful, held-still quality of someone who had been here before, in the room where the conversation was happening, where something might change, and who had learned not to push because pushing had not served her. "I'll call James," Arturo said, "to no one in particular." Then more directly to Rosa, "No promises." "I know," she said, "no promises. But I'll call." She nodded once. That was all. She didn't say thank you, not because she wasn't grateful, but because I think she understood that thank you would have made it about her, and it wasn't about her. It was about Marta and the taste of the water and 79 years, and a song in a language Arturo had never learned. After lunch, I walked Rosa to her truck, a vehicle I hadn't known she had, as it turned out. It was parked in a lot 2 blocks over, an old Toyota, rusted in the wheel wells, with a cracked taillight and 2 bumper stickers whose text had faded to ambiguity. The bed was covered with a tonneau cover under which, she explained without being asked, she kept her camping equipment, her document archive, and a spare 5-gallon water container. She wasn't sleeping in the open. She was sleeping in the truck, or in the very occasional motel when the nights made it necessary. I'd imagined the barefoot homelessness more dramatically than it was, and less dramatically. She was not destitute. She was disciplined, operating on a minimum, directing her resources entirely toward the work. The canvas bag, the worn dress, the bare feet were not evidence of catastrophe. They were evidence of a choice about what mattered and what could be left behind. I thought about the $2 again. "You're going north today," I said. "Tonight. I want to reach the Bosque by morning. There's a plant community near Bernardo I need to see before the season shifts." She loaded the canvas bag into the cab through the passenger window, which she cranked down manually. The truck looked like it had strong opinions about running and had been persuaded to hold them. "Rosa," I said. She looked at me across the truck bed. "The laugh," I said, "that first morning." A small pause. "Yes." "It didn't make me feel foolish," I said. "I mean, it did, but not in a way I resented. It felt like being corrected by someone who wasn't trying to correct me, just responding honestly." She thought about that. "That's probably the kindest interpretation." "It's the accurate one," I said. "I walked up to you and I'd already decided what you were." The laugh was you being accurate about that without punishing me for it. She leaned against the truck. The afternoon heat was pressing down on everything. Somewhere above us I looked automatically. The hawk was there again, or one very like it, circling the water tower. "I've been laughed at more cruelly," she said. "In my department by people who thought my research wasn't legitimate, by review boards, by land managers who said I had no standing." She said this without heat. "That kind of laugh is different. It's trying to make you disappear." "And mine?" "Yours was surprise," she said. "At the assumption, I've learned that surprised people, if they're decent, can correct. People who aren't surprised at all, who think they already know, those are the harder rooms." I thought about that, about the people who hadn't laughed, who'd been certain and stayed certain. "Keep going," I said. It came out more abrupt than I intended, but she understood it. "I will," she said, simply, a fact, not a reassurance. She opened the driver's door. Then she stopped and turned back. She reached into the canvas bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, a photocopy of the hand-drawn map, one layer of it at least. She held it out. "Your share of the record," she said, "in case anything comes of the call." I took it. It was warm from being in the bag. I unfolded it partway. The spring marked with a small circle, the boundary lines, the cottonwood markers, her handwriting at the margins. "Thank you," I said. "Breakfast logic," she said. The truck started on the second try, which felt about right. She pulled out of the lot without drama. I stood with the folded map and watched her go down the main street of Magdalena, past Trevino's, past the barber shop where the old men sat in their chairs, past the water tower where the hawk still circled, until the truck was dust and distance, and then just an idea of movement. I drove home in the afternoon. 60 miles of juniper and heat, the way it always is, the mountains changing as I moved north, the familiar geometry of the land assembling itself around me the way it does when you've known it long enough. The cracked dashboard of my own truck, fixed now, the bearing solid, hummed evenly. The radio played a station that faded in and out. I let it. I passed the fence line, the stretch of barbed wire that I'd crossed 3 days ago without thinking much about it, and then crossed again with a different kind of attention. I didn't stop, but I noticed it the way you notice something when its meaning has shifted, the wire looking the same, the yellow signs looking the same, and something irreversibly different about what I understood to be behind them. Marcus called when I was 20 miles out. "Truck fixed." "Yeah, good as it gets." "You sound different," he said. "I'm fine." "Dad, you sound actually fine, which is different from fine." I laughed, a single real one. "I met someone," I said, and then immediately, "Not like that. A researcher, working on traditional ecological knowledge. She's documenting plant sites and oral histories along the corridor." A pause. Marcus is not a stupid man. He processes things quickly and quietly. And I made some phone calls today that might not go anywhere and might go somewhere. "About what?" "Water rights, access, the spring on the Berla parcel that's been fenced off since '61. A longer pause. "That's Dad, that's not a small thing." "No," I agreed. "It's not. Is that why you're okay?" I thought about it. I looked at the road. The desert moving past, the juniper, the orange earth, the sky beginning to think about evening. The folded map on the passenger seat. "I think I've been driving 60 miles to fix wheel bearings for about 31 years, I said, "and not seeing much else. And something happened this week that made me see a little more." Marcus was quiet, then the researcher. "Among other things. Is she going to be back this way?" "I don't know. I gave her my number. She may not use it." "But you hope she does." "I hope the spring stays on the record," I said, "whether she comes back or not." He was quiet again. In the silence, I could hear his keyboard. He'd gone back to it the way he always does, but gently, the way he types when he's listening to something else at the same time. "Write it down, Dad," he said. "Already did," I said. I reached the ranch at 7. The evening was the kind that makes you forgive everything, the heat breaking into something soft and gold, the shadows long across the pasture, the horses moving in the south field with the settled ease of animals who knew where they were and trusted it. I parked the truck and sat in it for a while before going in. I opened the field log to the last page I'd written on. Under the final entry, the observation about the fence line on the drive home, I added, "The spring is documented. Marta knows the water is still there. Archero will make a phone call that might not go anywhere and might. Rosa will be at the Bernardo Bosque by morning. The hawk was above the water tower when she left. I don't know if it was the same hawk. I've never known how to tell. It moved the same way, the patient circles of something that understands thermals and uses them. Something that knows the landscape well enough to work with what it offers." She laughed because I was certain. I was certain because I looked and didn't see. I'd like to learn to look better. I think that's the right thing to take from this. Not guilt, which is useless, but the practice. Look more carefully. Ask what's behind the fence. Ask what the taste of the water was. Ask correctly. I closed the log. Outside, the horses had moved closer to the near fence, the way they do at dusk, when the pasture cools and they drift toward the familiar things. One of them, the bay mare I'd had for 8 years, was watching the road. The way horses watch when someone they've noticed before might be coming back. She wasn't, probably, but I'd made the calls, and Archero would make his. And somewhere south of here, between the canyon and the bosque, a woman in a battered Toyota with a tonneau cover and a hand-drawn map, and a notebook full of things that needed to be kept, was driving into the evening, and the research was happening, and the record was being kept. That's its own kind of water, the kind that finds its way under fences. I went inside and started dinner and left the field log open on the counter, the last page face up.